welcome everyone. Thank you so much for joining me for this Leadership at Work interview. I am here with Judge Leslie E. Harris, who I interviewed. I think Judge Harris was my first guest as the Leadership at Work interview series back in 2021. And so if you haven't seen that interview, it's on YouTube, it's on the channel, and you can learn more about his background and his leadership journey. But today we're going to be talking about addressing systemic racism and its effect on the criminal justice system. And Judge Harris is now the chair of the Internal Affairs Oversight Panel and commissioner for the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency for the City of Boston and Boston Police Department. So thank you so much for joining me, Judge Harris, for this important conversation.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes. So your background, your illustrious background, and the work that you continue to do has really centered around the criminal justice system. You were an attorney for the Suffolk County DA's office. You've been a probation officer. You've been a public defender, and you're also an educator. And so you've been in this space for a long time. And prior to your roles with the City of Boston, you were a juvenile court judge, and I had the privilege of interning with you. So can you talk about your transition from judge to now chair and commissioner?
Well, I believe in community activism. Mm-hmm. Even when I was a judge, it felt strange not being able to sit on boards and express my own feelings and criticize things. In Massachusetts, judges are appointed. Mm-hmm. We're not elected. So we could not do politics. We could not comment on public issues. We basically had a muffler on our face. We couldn't talk. When I retired, a whole new world opened up for me. I could criticize my colleagues. I could criticize the police. I could try to work with people to change how some things were being done. I can have an opinion that I could express again. And that's what I've been doing for the last now going on 9 years. I retired in 2014. Seemed like just the other day, but it's almost 9 years coming up on. And it's been wonderful. I've been able to sit on community boards, been able to sit on panels that talked about issues other than legal construct or, the law specifically. I've always been able to talk about justice and whether or not I felt that we were doing justice. Mm-hmm. A lot of people don't call it the justice system anymore. They call it the court system or the judicial system because they didn't feel that they were getting justice or that it was for them. And I understand that because there were times, especially in juvenile court, and I'm a crybaby and I admit it to anybody. I cried because of what the law said I had to do to a child, and I didn't always agree with the law, but I took an oath to uphold that law. And so part of my challenge was trying to convince lawmakers and others to change the law, to give judges more discretion and to do away with mandatory sentences and those types of things. Mm-hmm. So I come from a law enforcement family in some ways. My father was a military police officer. My older brother was a police officer, sergeant, and then a police chief. My brother-in-law was a lieutenant with the Michigan State Police. One of my chosen nephews was a Boston police officer. Wow. My neighbor across the street, good friend, he retired now, but a Boston police officer. My neighbor up the street was a state trooper. So, and they helped raise my kids and I helped raise theirs. Mm-hmm. And so I don't have a hatred for the police.
Mm.
Even though if you had asked me when I was growing up, I would have said something quite different.
Yeah.
As a child, if we saw the police coming, we ran. We didn't have to be doing anything wrong,
Mm.
but we knew we were not going to have a positive interaction with the police. So we saw them coming, we took off. And I don't think that's the way policing should be.
No.
We should be excited about them coming, sitting and talking with them, working with the police, but that's not the way it is. And one of the reasons I want to be on these committees and panels is because I like to work to change that.
Mm. And so, I actually have a high level of respect for the police. One of my first job, and this was a summer role through ABCD. I was working with the Boston Police Department in Roxbury B2 unit. I will never forget that experience. It was probably one of the best experiences I had in the supervising police officer, Angela. I just can't remember her last name, but Angela, I think she's retired now, had such an influence on my life. And then, of course, working with you, juvenile court, and then with the Boston Public Defender's Office. And then I have a few family members and a lot of friends in the Boston Police Department and other police departments in the country. And so I think this conversation is really about seeing reform throughout our country, but also kind of elevating the work that they do and addressing the areas where there needs to be review, where there needs to be reform, so that our communities are safe and have partnership and relationships with the police departments so that they can thrive and that there's not this hostile experience, if you will, in some of these cases. So can you talk about the work then that you're doing through the panel and as a commissioner of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency?
Well, one of the things is we get to subpoena records.
Mhm.
We can hold the police accountable. With the Internal Affairs Oversight Panel, we review the decisions made by the Internal Affairs Department of the police.
Mhm.
If someone is unhappy with the outcome, they can appeal to our committee.
Mhm.
And we can read the case and send it back for more information, or we can say we disagree with it and the commissioner should review it.
Mhm.
Now, it sounds great in some ways, but the other side of it is that I wish we had more power.
Yeah.
We only get the information that is given to them. I'd love to be able to take a case and say, oh, when I was a judge, I had a police officer testify in front of me about what he could see from a certain position in the neighborhood.
Mhm.
Well, I live in that neighborhood, and I knew what he was saying was impossible.
Mhm.
And so I put that on the record, that it was not possible because judges don't come in blind. We're supposed to be fair and all that, but we're not blind and we're not stupid. And when you say you can see through a wall or something, we can take umbrage with that.
Mhm.
And so I said, you need to go back and revisit that site and see what you could see and what you couldn't see, because what you said so far in court is not plausible.
Mhm.
And so I said, I have to rule against you because I know that that's not possible. Now, the DA didn't know it. The
Mhm.
defense attorney didn't know it
Mhm.
because they had never been to the site. And I said, I live in that community. I know that street. I know what's there. The evidence wasn't brought before me, but I still have to make a ruling on the credibility of this police officer. And I don't find his testimony to be credible. Now, there were a couple of police officers, they came in and said, the sun is shining, I'd grab my umbrella. But then there were others. I had police officers say, look, we didn't really have probable cause to search this kid, but we knew he had a gun. And so we did it. Said, now, I know that you can't allow, us to do that, and that you have to rule against us. Said, but we got a gun off the street. And I said, thank you. I said, you're right. I have to allow the motion to suppress because of the facts. But I appreciate your honesty and coming to court and saying you knew he had a gun, but you didn't have all of the things that go with proving it to a judge or probable cause to actually stop and search him. And I would listen to that police officer because he was honest and straightforward. But I also believe that we have militarized our police. To as a part of the training for this position that I hold now, we had to go through the police training. Not the full 6 months or whatever they do. It was an abbreviated training. But one of the things that you learn is police have to make decisions in a split second. So you can't have a coward, someone who's afraid, as a police officer.
Well, not just a coward, but you can't have people who have issues with power, right? You can't manage power because power is a privilege. And the more power you have, and the power to take someone's life with a gun is, is pretty high, right? That's a high level of power. And I think, I'm sorry.
Power that I've seen.
Yeah.
The police officer got out of his car and shot a 12-year-old child within seconds of getting out of his car.
Oh my God.
In Ohio, 12-year-old Kamir Rice.
Okay, was he in the park? I think, yeah.
Playing in the park with a toy gun, the way we did as children. And I just think that could have been my child. That could have been any child of color with a police officer who's afraid of people of color.
Yeah.
That's what that showed. And one of the things that I told to the people who were doing the training, they talked about their tour of duty, and when the tour of duty ended and all, I said, that's military talk.
Yeah.
I said, so the military's at war.
Yeah.
And that's their job. They go to war. You've adopted their language and their techniques. And now you're at war with the community. And I said, you can't do that. You can't talk about a tour of duty, because you're saying that you were at war during those 8, 10 hours, whatever it is that you were out there. And that gives you a mindset. I'm at war with this community. And we need to change that. We need to change what policing means. And I'm not one of those folks who use language like abolish the police.
Yeah.
But I do recognize the history of policing in this country, and that people who look like me or my children have been victimized unfairly by the police. I said more than 30 years ago that when white kids in the suburbs start getting arrested for possession of marijuana and all, they'll legalize it. That's just what happened. As long as it was inner city Black kids being arrested and can't get loans for school, can't go in the military. And if you don't go in the military, you won't be a Boston police officer or a fireman. And if they're only arresting Black kids in the inner city for those drugs, then the only people who are going to be eligible to be firemen are white folks. to be policemen, white
Mhm.
folks. And that's what you see. We have a very white fire department and a very white police department, even when they say that they're trying to change that.
Mhm.
But if you don't change the criteria, if you don't change the things that allow people to be included,
Mhm.
then you never change anything.
Mhm.
Former soldiers get priority in coming into the police force and the fire department.
Mhm.
And if you are eliminated from going into the service, then you cannot be a policeman
Mhm.
or a fireman
Mhm.
because they get first pick.
Mhm. So yeah, the civil service process in the city of Boston and really Massachusetts probably needs some review. As part of my work, I was working for MassDOT, Massachusetts Department of Transportation, and the MBTA, and before that with the treasurer's office. And so we work with police officers and the state police often on a number of issues. And so that was certainly something that required some review. And I don't know if there's been any change there. But here I live in Texas now, in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. And I would say from what I've seen, it's a pretty diverse workforce. It's very, very diverse. So has there been any effort to review the civil service requirements um, in
Yes,
Massachusetts, city of Boston? Yeah.
yes, I know that they have some of the tests, especially for promotion,
Mhm.
have been eliminated because they were biased. And I remember taking my first IQ test when we were in grade school,
Mhm.
and they were talking about golf and what a par is and an eagle. And I had no idea because I had never been to a golf course or seen a golf ball. And that in and of itself is biased. But most tests are designed around white males. So even white females are at a disadvantage
Mhm.
because the norm is centered around white males. When
Mhm.
they developed the SAT, the ACT, the LSAT, the Miller's analogies, they use white males as the standard.
Mhm.
And if you have not lived that privileged life,
Mhm.
you're at a disadvantage.
Mhm.
I would tell folks at the law school when I was working in admissions, you take a Black student's score. This is when they were doing the hundreds. I don't know how they do it now,
Mhm.
but I said you add 100, 150 points to their score, and you'll see how well they'll do in law school
Mhm.
because they are automatically 100 points below because of the biases of the test.
Mhm.
And sure enough, they listen to me a little bit,
Mhm.
and let some students in who wouldn't necessarily have gotten in with their test scores.
Mhm.
And they did extremely well.
Mhm. I always say tests are not a marker or evaluation of how smart you are. It's just your ability to take a test. It's your strategy, right? So it tests your strategy, it doesn't test your intelligence. So there are a number of other factors that, whether it's the police department or some other employment organization, can look at to determine one's competence or ability to do the job. And the test is certainly not one. I've seen a lot of not smart people, I've seen a lot of people with wonderful education couldn't do the job because they didn't have the practical real life experience necessary to get it done.
Also, you can be taught to
Yeah,
take the
yeah.
and like we took the test every 2 years when I was growing up. So we learned how to take the test. I
Mhm.
always thought I could take a test that I had no background in
Mhm.
and I'd do okay because
Mhm.
I was a test taker.
Mhm.
But wasn't always the greatest student, but
Mhm.
because I did well on tests, I got the opportunity to do things that others who were better students than me
Mhm.
didn't,
Mhm.
And also I grew up doing affirmative action.
Mhm.
So I got to have the opportunity, like Northwestern wasn't looking for students when my brother graduated from high school. So he went Marine Recon.
Mhm.
I graduate 2 years later, they're looking for Black students. And so I go to college. And that's the only difference. My older brother was my role model. You know, I watched him give a lady a ticket one day.
Mhm.
He is so polite and was so nice. She said thank you when he was through,
Mhm.
because of how he approached.
Mhm.
And I always, it wasn't when he passed it's a little over a year ago now, the number of people who said, because Sam did it, my older brother did it, they did it. He
Mhm.
was in the band, I was in the band. He was a patrol boy in grade school, I was a patrol boy in grade school, because I wanted to be like my big brother.
Mhm.
But it wasn't just me, it was a number of my friends and others who saw him that way. I believe if police officers were like him, we wouldn't have a problem. He
Mhm.
was caught up in a bank robbery, chasing suspects at a bank robbery in Chicago. They were shooting at him and he didn't fire back. And the newspapers, when they asked him, why didn't you fire at them? He said, because there were people beyond them.
Mhm.
If I missed them, I could have hit those people.
Mhm.
See, that's who you want. My neighbor across the street, police sergeant, was confronted by a guy with a knife. He never pulled his gun. He disarmed the guy without pulling a gun
Yeah.
because he was confident in his abilities. That's who you want for a police officer.
Mhm.
People who know how to talk to folks, how to de-escalate, how to avoid conflict, who treat people with respect. Most of the complaints we have gotten have been because people felt disrespected. He didn't talk to me right,
Mhm.
or he yelled at me. Those are the complaints. 90% of the complaints we've gotten has been around disrespect, and I understand that because I don't want to be disrespected. And so I think police officers have a obligation to treat people with respect on the street because they carry a gun and other people don't.
Well, I mean, that goes into a number of things, right? Insecurity, psychological, fitness, background.
When you're at war with your community, when you're doing a tour of duty,
Mhm.
all that goes together. They talk about the thin blue line. Well, there's that oath. That's that I'm a part. Years ago, when I was a public defender, I referred to the police as the largest gang in Boston.
Mhm.
The Herald had a field day with that I called them a gang. Well,
Mhm.
basically they are.
Mhm.
They're better equipped, have more power, have more organization, and there's more of them than any gang in Boston will ever have.
Mhm.
But they act like that too.
Yeah.
And that's the danger.
Mhm.
Um, when I said it, they didn't give the full story. They just said he called him a gang. Well, yes, I did, and I would stand by that because of how they act,
Mhm.
like any other gang, power hungry gang,
Mhm.
taking advantage of a community.
Mhm.
And that's what we have to fight against. We have to make police officers a part of our community, who
Mhm.
feel a part of our community,
Mhm.
who, when they live in the community and raise their children
Yeah.
in that community, um, they want their children treated a certain way, so they would want to treat other people's children that
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
You know, um, my greatest fear was not the gangs in Boston. I was always afraid the police were going to do something to my boys
Mhm.
because they're big kids. I mean, 6'2" and 6'5", and my nephew lived with me, 6'10". Their physical presence
Yeah.
sometimes intimidates people.
Mhm.
And I was always afraid for them. Every time they stepped out of the house,
Mhm.
you know, that little prayer went up, please bring my child back home safe.
Yeah.
You know, now they're grown and I still feel that,
Yeah.
um, that worry about them. Um, and that, that young man beaten by 5 Black police officers. Well, that's because they weren't Black, they were blue,
Yeah.
and they were part of the game.
So I want to hold that thought and go back to the purpose of the commission and the panel. And then I want to get back into this because you're going somewhere. That's actually the first place I want to go, but I really want to give the viewers a little bit of understanding around how this all started. So I understand that the police reform task was under Mayor Walsh first, and then Mayor Wu signed an ordinance. But can you talk about the work that you do as a commissioner of the Office of Police Accountability and Transparency, what that entails, and then what you do as a chair of the Internal Affairs Oversight Panel? What's the difference and where's the collaboration between the two groups?
Okay, OPAT is the overall body.
Yeah.
They have investigators. Um, they have the Citizen Review Board,
Mhm.
which looks at complaints.
Mhm.
They we are an appellate division
Mhm. Okay.
of the process,
Mhm.
and we try to make sure that not only is the community being treated right, but that police officers are being treated right
Mhm.
by the police department. See, one of the things that we know is that Black police officers get disciplined more severely and more often
Yep.
than their white counterparts for the same actions.
Yeah.
And so one of the things our job is to make sure that people are treated fairly and equally.
Mhm.
And I take that very serious. I know that at one point, a number of police officers lost their positions because of the testing of their hair for drugs. This is some years back. Well, Black people's hair, even if you're not using drugs, will test for drugs if you've been around. If you're on the drug enforcement team and you make a bust where there's cocaine and dust in the air, your hair is much more likely to test positive
Because it
than,
absorbs. It absorbs because of the texture of our hair. We
well,
absorb.
again, the test was designed around white hair,
Yeah.
not
Wow.
Black hair.
Mhm.
And so it is sensitive to the standards that white hair would be. And
Mhm.
the appeals court, the federal courts overruled that and said that it wasn't a fair test.
Mhm.
But, you can't undo that bail once it's been rung and you are demoted or changed to a different position
Mhm.
than what you were doing. So those are the type things that you look for: the
Mhm.
fairness, the how officers are promoted or not promoted,
Mhm.
um, what they use against
Mhm.
a police officer.
Mhm.
So that's the part where we try to protect the police.
Mhm.
On the other side of it is we try to protect the community, the public, from abusive police officers.
Mhm.
Now, they've also created a statewide certification process
Mhm.
for police officers, not just in Boston, but across the state. And they've already decertified some police officers, which
Oh,
means that they can't have police powers. That
wow.
doesn't mean they get fired, but they end up at the desk instead of in the community or in the field.
Mhm.
And I think that's a much more important position in some ways, the certification or decertification of police officers, because then you can take bad police officers off the street.
And what are they looking for when they decertify police officers?
The fact that the police officer lies in court,
Mm-hmm.
the fact that they've got 10 complaints for abuse
Mm-hmm.
of citizens. You know, one of the greatest things about all of this now is that almost everything is on video.
Yeah.
So things that police officers got away with 20 years ago, they can't do now because it's on video.
Mm-hmm.
Police force should have to wear cameras
Mm-hmm.
because it protects them and it protects the community.
Mm-hmm.
There should be no, what's the word that they use? Qualified immunity.
Yeah.
You know, if you do something bad, you should be held accountable. You know, they could set a standard, you know, again, most policing is done gradually, but
Mm-hmm.
there are those situations where you run into instant trouble, where someone shoots at you or look like they're going to shoot at you and you have to react.
Mm-hmm.
That's not what I'm talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking mostly about police officers who don't give people a chance
Mm-hmm.
to de-escalate or to explain what they don't explain to people what's going on. That's been
Yeah.
one of the biggest things you've seen. Before, I was never on Facebook as a judge. Now I'm on Facebook. I can, you know, I see the videos and they say, officer, can you tell me why you stopped me? You know, and walk away. Well, people have a right to know what they are being accused of doing wrong.
Mm-hmm.
You know, people want to be treated with civility.
Yeah.
And that's not much to ask. If you stop a person, you should immediately say, the reason I stopped you is. That means in a car or on the street, so that the person understands what's going on. And I believe that most people would react differently if they knew what they're being charged for or why they're being stopped, you know, at least.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and that's not much to ask. Police should do that. That's one of the things that should be an ongoing part of police training. And if you're not civil, if you're not treating people right, you shouldn't be on the street.
Yeah. So the work that you do through the panel and also with OPAT, I'll call it that. Is there a model for this that you are all drawing from, or is this something that the city of Boston has created?
It exists in some other cities.
Mhm.
I don't know that they're set up exactly like us. I know there was a model under the former mayor that has been changed. They would walk out of we can't take files home.
Mhm.
You know, everything is kept in the office under lock and key.
Mhm.
We can't, unless the police officer who's in front of us says he'd like a public hearing, we have to do it and off the record, you know, not in public.
Mhm.
And that is to protect them from abuse, you know, also.
Mhm.
People will accuse a police officer of something that we've seen, but there's no proof of it,
Mhm.
you know, and without proof, what will the judge do? You know, if you don't have proof of something, you have to find them not guilty.
Mhm.
If there are no witnesses, in some cases, people file a complaint and never come to the hearing.
Mhm.
You know, that's frustrating.
Mhm.
But it's part of the reality of life. You know, in court, I had people who filed complaints against someone, get it all the way up to trial, and then the person refuses to come to court.
Mhm.
Now, in reality, it's on that person's record that they've been arrested and arraigned,
Mhm.
and you dismiss it.
Mhm.
And the problem is, people say, well, there's smoke, there's fire. And you go apply for a job and it shows up on your record, you're at a loss because now you got to try to explain it away. Why take a chance on somebody who has something on their record when you can get somebody else who
Mhm.
doesn't have anything on their record?
Does the city of Boston partner, well, you and the panel and the commission, do you partner with other cities? You said there are other cities that are doing similar work. Do you partner with other cities on this
No, you can't.
in
I
terms of
don't.
best practices, exchanging best practices?
Part of Stephanie Everett, who's the head of the department, it's her job to look for best practices and
Okay.
bring them to us.
Okay.
But
So,
not, we can go out looking.
okay. So then what progress do you feel the office OPAT has made and the panel has made in terms of police reform and improving the culture of policing?
It's too early.
Mhm.
Unfortunately, we just got started.
2021, right?
Yes. Well, that's when it was, but it wasn't funded until this past year,
Oh, okay. Okay.
2022. So Stephanie was the only person on this, on staff, and
Mhm.
she had to create an office, find an office. She didn't want to do it in City Hall. We're in Roxbury.
Mhm.
And she, had to hire staff, wait for the commissioners and the boards to be appointed. And so we're getting there. We started out with a few cases to learn and to be able to see what's going on. We will go back and look at some old cases,
Mhm.
and we will, become a little more aggressive
Mhm.
in our work. But right now, it's still a learning phase, I think, to educate the community that we exist, that
Yeah.
people can come to the OPAT office and file a complaint instead of going to a police station where they might feel intimidated.
So let's share that information. If you live in the city of Boston, right? So again, I'm in Texas, Judge Harris,
Yes.
Massachusetts. So we're talking Massachusetts. Texas may have, the Dallas-Fort Worth area may have different processes and procedures, but we're talking about the city of Boston. So if you're in the city of Boston and you've had a bad experience with a police officer, or you feel that your rights have been violated, right? They would go to which office in Roxbury?
The OPAT office in Nubian Square,
Okay.
2201 Washington Street, right in the heart of
Yeah.
Nubian Square. So
What used
Dudley,
to be called Dudley
yes,
Square. Yes.
right across from the Blair parking lot. You can go in and file your complaint. It will be investigated.
Mhm. So what does the process look like? So once you get the complaint, you investigate, what is the communication to the person who complained?
They let them know, first off, they get as much information as they can from the complainant.
Mhm.
Look for witnesses, look to see if there's any video of it, and to maintain contact with the complainant. There's a time frame, and can't think of it off. I think it's like 90 days or something like that, that they have to complete the investigation.
Mhm.
That's not enough time generally, but
Mhm.
the pressure is good because it makes you go out and do what you got to do.
Mhm.
But they investigate, they look for witnesses, they look for video, they talk to the police officer, interview the police officer,
Mhm.
and then they bring it in before the civilian review board, and they can do a hearing on the case.
Mhm.
And they don't have to go through internal affairs anymore.
Okay.
I think that's one of the big differences, is not having to go to internal affairs or to a police station to file a complaint about a police officer, filing it with his co-workers, his friends,
Yeah.
or her friends, big difference.
Mm-hmm. And is this process confidential for the complainant?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Yeah. So once
When you say confidential, the police officer generally will know who the complainant is,
okay.
because it's the person they interacted with.
Mm-hmm.
And until the hearing, it's private. The public hearing is a public hearing.
Mm-hmm.
So anyone can be there for the hearing. We have the open records responsibilities, that things have to be open to the public, except when you're in executive session.
Mm-hmm.
And on the appellate level, the executive sessions are closed if the police officer asks for it to be closed.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you prevent retaliation? I mean, there's gonna, if someone's complaining, there's gonna be fear that there might be some retaliation. How do you prevent that? Can you really prevent it?
I don't know how you would prevent it,
Yeah.
except they can file a new complaint.
Yeah.
And that, if we can see evidence that the police officer went back after a person, I think that's a criminal offense.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So that's a whole different level.
Okay, so thank you for that. And once we're done with the interview, I'll certainly get the information included in the description of this video. So whoever is interested and would like to file a complaint, or if they have questions, want to learn more about this work, they can do that. But I want to go back to something you're talking about that you shared early on about the onboarding process, essentially, for your role as commissioner and chair, and that you had to go through some of the police training. Can you talk about the training? And I'm gonna ask you about one aspect of the training, if it exists. But can you talk about the training? What was that like for you?
It was educational. One of the things that snap judgments have to be made.
Yeah.
We went to the shooting range,
Mm-hmm.
not with real guns, with air pistols, but they sound like and feel like real guns.
Yeah.
And you're shooting first at targets, but then they put you in a real life scenario.
Mm-hmm.
One of them, a man and his wife are having a fight. The man is now holding a baby in his arm and has a weapon in his hand. What do you do?
Mm-hmm.
Do you fire? Try to talk him down. And I mean, it was intense.
Mm-hmm.
There was a group of us there, so not everyone did the same thing each time. But in the situation I had, it was just target shooting. And I've been shooting for years, so I'm relatively confident in my ability to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
But snap shooting, when you have to make a decision in less than 5 seconds and sometimes in 2 seconds,
Mm-hmm.
how accurate are you? I watched my older brother shoot. I would have had him on my back any day. That boy could shoot.
Yeah.
That's who you want. But he's also one of those folks who would be the last one to fire. He would try some other way.
Mm-hmm.
And in that situation, I found myself thinking, how would my brother handle this?
Mm-hmm.
As a seasoned police officer of almost 40 years,
Mm-hmm.
And I tried to, again, do what he would do.
Mm-hmm. And you talked about your brother really treating everyone he encountered with respect. Obviously, he had to protect himself and his life and his partner's life. right?
Yeah.
But treating everyone you encounter, number one, as a human being, two, with respect. And I think three, it sounds like he had a great deal of compassion for people, and that he didn't want to have to take their lives or injure them unnecessarily.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that um, people admired about it.
Yeah.
Sam was always calm. He didn't get excited,
Mhm.
Um, there were so many stories that other cops told us about Sam in stressful situations and how he stayed calm and it made the situation much easier to handle,
Mhm.
with nobody being injured.
Mhm.
When he first became the police chief in Benton Harbor, for instance, there was a riot.
Mhm.
And I mean, he hadn't been there a week. And person was shot and injured by a police officer who also got shot by the person who had been injured. And he was held up in a building.
Wow.
And when my brother got to the scene, they were waiting for SWAT, which was almost 2 hours away because they didn't have their own SWAT team.
Wow.
And the kid's mother was saying, come and get him. He's injured. Come and get him. Well, nobody wanted to walk in because he had a gun.
Mhm.
Except my brother Sam said to another officer, come with me, back me up. He went in, brought the young man out, took the gun from him. He didn't get excited. He didn't want to kill anybody. He
Yeah.
wanted to avoid violence. One of the stories they told me about, a husband and wife who owned a restaurant got into a fight in the restaurant, domestic disturbance. And the police went. Sam walked in. The guy attacked him immediately with a skillet, cast iron skillet.
Mhm.
And they said Sam just laid him on the ground, took the skillet, was handcuffing him. The lady picked up the skillet and came at him, and they got ready to yell, look out. And he just simply turned and laid her on the ground and took the skillet from her. He was very good at hand to hand, type of defense. Um, when we were kids, he was the one that taught folks how to fight.
Mhm.
We had a guy in our building kept getting beat up and he wouldn't fight back.
Mhm.
And Sam took him down on the side of the building and taught him how to take care of himself.
Mhm.
You know, um, there's so many wonderful police officers out there.
Yeah.
I know some of them. I interacted with them in the courts, but I also saw the others. Some of them are in jail still
Mhm.
for some of the abuse they did in the community. And I think that we have to have a constant review of who we have on our police force. Any other job, you get a review.
Mhm.
You don't live up to what their expectations are, they let you go.
Yeah.
But police unions
Yeah.
won't let you do that.
Yeah.
Now, I'm a union guy from way back. I believe in unions, but also believe in responsibility and being reasonable.
Mhm.
And I think that unions protect themselves by protecting themselves from bad cops.
Yeah.
And they have to be aware of that. And just because someone accuses you of something shouldn't end your career.
Yeah.
But if you're repeatedly out there hurting people or abusing people, then that's not the right job for you.
Mhm. So let's talk about police culture, right?
Um, okay.
Yeah. So oh God, we talked a little about um, the hiring processes, if you will, to get into the police department and some of the requirements. One being some level of military service, but psychological fitness, disposition towards people in general, right? You have, and I don't want to paint a broad brush, but you have some people in the police departments who use their power, and you can see that there's some level of insecurity. So whenever they encounter anyone, it's this, it's this ego-driven approach in interaction. It's like, wait a second, first of all, de-escalate as an officer, because I'm not coming to you with any malintent. But I think overall, my experience has been with police officers pretty good. And I would say a lot of them know how to engage people. But the bad actors, right? The people, the police officers who misuse their position because of an insecurity, or because they're stressed, or because there are issues at home, those are the ones we remember, and those are the ones that are always in the news. But those are also the people you talked about, unions and the protection they get. But you also have a culture that we're in the police departments, they protect, and they don't necessarily share, or and I don't want to say this incorrectly, but in order for, and you said this well, right? So in order for a police department to be effective, they have to address the ones that are within the police department who are ineffective and abusive and misusing their roles, right? So the ones that have had bad interactions or have been overly aggressive with the communities that they serve, they need to be addressed. What is happening in the police culture and the law enforcement culture that prevents that from happening?
Again, it's protection by the union.
Yeah.
It is the deals that cities make with the police department. But part of it is our media.
Mm-hmm.
Too often the TV shows that we watch, and most of our education in this country is done by television.
Mm-hmm.
Our superstars, historical figures are all brought to us on TV through a lens that is not always accurate.
Mm-hmm.
Remember the Alamo, Davy Crockett, Daniel Boone was a man. I mean, that's where we learn our history.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also learn how police should act. So you watch TV shows and you have an abusive cop, and the person that they're abusing is a bad guy. Well, that's happened.
Mm-hmm.
But what about the good guy that you're abusing? You can't be the judge and jury when you're a police officer.
Yeah.
And that's what too often happens. They're convinced the person is guilty, and they don't have to treat them with respect. As a public defender, I sometimes had clients that I didn't like. But my job was not liking or disliking my client. My job was to protect them from the abuses of a system that was not user-friendly. My job was to make them prove that my client was guilty of something.
Mm-hmm.
And not just jump to the conclusion that my client did something wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And I think part of the challenge we have is to balance TV shows.
Yeah.
So that you have some good cops and some bad cops.
Mm-hmm.
And if we show cops being held accountable on TV,
Mm-hmm.
then people get used to that.
So you kind of create a culture of accountability and just kind of normalize in every profession, there's some level of accountability.
Judges can be just as abusive.
Yeah.
I've watched abusive judges.
Yeah.
I've watched judges who had no right to be in a courtroom,
Yeah.
but they've been on for 20 years,
Yeah.
but they don't show respect to the people coming in front of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons I retired is I caught myself being short
Mm-hmm.
with some of the lawyers who came in front of me.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, why did I snap at that lawyer who was just doing their job?
Yeah.
And I said, I'm losing my patience. It's time for me to move to a different job or move out of this job. Because if I can't be patient and respectful to the lawyers coming in front of me,
Mm-hmm.
how am I ever going to be respectful to the clients coming in front of me?
I love that. I think just that level of self-awareness, and that's what I'm going back to, the psychological fitness. You got to be able to see yourself and understand what your shortcomings are, especially when you come into these roles. Because for me, every police officer is a leader, right? Because you're in a leadership position. I should say that, because you're a person of influence. That
Yep.
that uniform, that gun, that position, your authority puts you in a place of influence. And so you have to be self-aware. You have to know what's going on in your head, in your heart, and at home, so that you're addressing that and it's not spilling over into your role. And that doesn't mean you're perfect. Stuff happens and you get short and you get frustrated. Believe me, I've had some blunders as an HR executive, state official, attorney, whatever other titles I've had. But just recognizing that, taking a step back. So you really said that you didn't have grace, that you were not having the same level of grace for your position in your role as you did before. And that was one of the factors in you retiring. So then going back to the culture of the police, of law enforcement, they encounter very tense situations, life and death situations on a regular basis. Most human beings never have to encounter what police officers do. So when I say I have a high degree of respect, their jobs, they at any point in time, they could be shot or lose their lives, right? And they go out and they do it day in and day out. That is a serious responsibility, a serious undertaking, a serious sacrifice. And they don't always get the appreciation and respect they deserve for what they do. So what is the commission, the panel looking at how they're managing stress, the day-to-day
That's not part of
stress?
our job.
Hmm?
I wish that we had a panel
Yeah.
that worked on issues like that,
Yeah.
but it's not a part of what we do.
Mm-hmm.
I believe that police officers should be able to take sabbaticals.
Yeah.
That there should be stress classes like yoga, Tai Chi or something that's available to police officers. One of the things I saw some businesses doing is putting in exercise machines in their companies and letting people exercise,
Mm-hmm.
having rest spots where they could go take a nap.
Yeah.
Those things make a difference.
Mm-hmm.
And you get more work out of them than when you don't do that sometimes, because
Mm-hmm.
you keep yourself healthy and clear-minded. I
Mm-hmm.
think police officers should have an ability to de-stress, if that's
Yes.
a word.
Yeah.
They should be able to be secure in their job and still be able to leave for a while,
Yeah.
if that's what it takes.
Mm-hmm.
A year or so after I retired, I was chopping at the bits to get back on the bench
Mm-hmm.
because I had, given myself that time to be away from the stress of
Yeah.
the job.
Yeah.
But once you're retired,
Yeah.
and plus you turn 70, you got to be out
Mm-hmm.
in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
You know, um, I miss my job. I loved my job. I'm just not sure that I would go back to it.
Mhm.
Not the way that, the full time daily stress that it brought. And I think that's what some police officers. I had when I was a public or the DA, one of the two jobs. One of the DAs left and became a police officer. He was involved in a case, one of those tragic cases where the mother had killed her kids, and they came in and she tried to hit them with a hatchet or a machete or something, and they end up having to shoot and kill her. He had to give up being a police officer. It destroyed him,
Yeah.
having to take a human life,
Yeah.
you know, and seeing these children dead,
Mhm.
I mean, um, both my older brother and my neighbor talked about having to be at car accidents and seeing the carnage, the dismembered bodies and what that does to them, you
Yeah.
know. Um, my younger brother during Vietnam was in the medical evacuation unit, and they did a job on him,
Mhm.
taking out injured folks or dead folks. And I mean, it really worked on him. And I understand the stress of putting that gun on every day. I'm a licensed gun carrier. I don't carry my gun.
Mhm.
You know, I had it when I was on the bench. I didn't carry it on the bench, but I
Mhm.
got death threats,
Yeah.
and I felt, well, let me be careful. But without that, I don't carry it,
Mhm.
and I'm happy not to carry it.
Mhm.
You know, having to wear that gun every day, just about, can be awful stressful just in itself, even if you never pull it.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know,
So I've gone to a gun range and I've shot. I'm actually a pretty good shooter. I'm really good. So and I don't have I'm not a licensed carrier, but it's something that I've thought about a lot. Um, but I think for me it's the stress of having a firearm in my home or apartment or just carrying it wherever I am. That the stress of that I think is pretty serious. Um, so the culture of the police of law enforcement needs some review, from its hiring practices to how we keep people accountable, and the work that you're doing is part of that. Um, but also addressing the stress, the unusual amount of stress that police officers face on a day to day. Because I think healthier police officers who have integrity, police officers who can keep each other accountable, will only make the law enforcement um, uh, departments and roles that they hold more attractive to people who are interested in that profession, but also it will help in terms of how they engage the communities that they serve. So we didn't see that though when it came to George Floyd or most recently Tyre Nichols. And in this situation, it was 5 Black police officers who who brutally beat and killed an unarmed Black man. I, I'll start with just asking you, what were your thoughts when you heard and saw this?
one of the things that when I was on the bench,
Yeah.
I wouldn't watch the news
Hmm.
because I didn't want to go to court angry.
Hmm.
I didn't drive in downtown. I took the T.
Hmm.
But sometimes I would drive in and I'd be so angry from the traffic trying to
Yeah.
get in. And I didn't want to bring that anger on the bench with me. So
Hmm.
I took the T and I see people and laugh and joke and go to work. Well, have you ever seen Eyes on the Prize?
I have. Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, my landlord, I shared a house with Henry Hampton, who was the executive producer of Eyes on the Prize. So I ended up working on parts of it, wasn't a producer now, but we were friends and he needed something. I was there to do it. I've been in a couple of his films that he did, documentaries. But I can't watch it. I've watched the whole series more than once, but I get so angry watching it. See, I'm of an age where I grew up watching. I was a young kid, but I was old enough when Emmett Till was killed to understand what was going on. I could read the papers and all about his murder. And from then till now, I've watched so many people be brutalized and murdered, not always on the news. We didn't always capture it because we didn't have video cameras before recently. So I've watched little pieces of it. I have not watched the whole thing because I don't want to be angry.
Yeah.
I again say they were not black cops, they were blue cops. They were a gang, the true meaning of a gang. They took, if you believe what you hear, they sent pictures and texts of what they did to this man to other people. I'm interested in why the one white police officer who used the spray has not been brought into the public. That was part of what killed this man, spraying that stuff in his face and then not addressing it. And he's over there saying, I can't breathe. You're not doing anything to help him. I just find it's a part of the trauma that Black people live with on a constant basis. It is part of the trauma that I've lived with and had to deal with in my life. I have a scar on my head from the police.
Wow.
I was delivering my newspapers and they, 12 years old, 13 years old maybe, they snatched me off the street, throw me in the car, don't put my head down. I hit the side of the car, they throw me in the back seat. I'm bleeding. We go 5 or 6 blocks. They stop and throw me out. I have no idea to this day why they did that. As a child, I was afraid to tell my parents because I thought I had done something wrong. But that will be with me all my life. That's part of the trauma of growing up in the inner city, and of being Black in America.
Yeah.
And we can try to talk around it, over it, and anything else. It is a part of what we've had to live through.
Yeah.
And this is another one of those scars that's been inflicted on us. And in some ways, I'm glad it was not white police officers. I'm glad that we didn't have a race riot around it.
So why are you glad they weren't white police officers? Is because you think the reaction would have been different?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It shows a part of policing that we don't get to see often.
Yeah.
It shows that it's part of the blue. It's not just Black and white.
Yeah.
And I think it was important for people to see that it's the culture of the police.
Yeah.
And not the color, just the color of the police. Now, color can be a motivating factor in it, of course, but we're not protected all the time simply because it's a Black police officer. And we have to be aware of that.
So
I'm angry.
So yeah.
I'm curious what happened.
And I've not watched the video. I won't watch the video. When George Floyd was murdered, a friend of mine, another attorney, told me about it. He said, you have to watch it. And I'm like, I don't want to watch it because there's certain movies. So I've seen Eyes on the Prize. It's not something I can watch more than once. For those who don't know, Eyes on the Prize covers the civil rights movement. And so it's definitely something you have to watch at least once, because the reality and the trauma that that people during that time and even now are facing is very, very real.
I can watch Roots.
I'm sorry?
Roots. Alex Haley.
I can't, yeah, no, can't watch it. Can't watch it. I just don't want to, I don't want to harbor hate. I don't want to harbor anger in my heart. I know what it can do. I know that I'm a very kind person, but I think the kindest people are the ones you have to be careful about, because we just have that little bit of something that we're kind for a reason, right? You poke a little too much. It's like, yeah, okay. But anyway, so going back to the culture of law enforcement, of these police departments, what is this? Is this systemic racism and its effects on these Black police officers? Is it a cultural issue? Is it a combination? What is it?
I think it's a combination of things.
Yeah.
Part of it is the culture of policing in the United States.
Yeah.
Part of it is that. A part of it is gang mentality.
Yeah.
When you have power and you get, nothing will justify. There's nothing that they can say that justifies the way they treat it.
Yeah.
That, but the same is true of George Floyd and others. There's so many unknown people who've been. Margaret Burnham just did a book called "My Hands Now Known," and it talks about the history in some ways of police abuses and killings of Black people, mostly in the South. But we all know that it's not limited.
No, it's everywhere.
Yes. And if you ask most Black police officers, they would say, I would never do that.
Yeah.
Okay, and most of them wouldn't.
Mm-hmm.
But there are those who would get caught up in the moment with their gang members who would be abusive.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I don't believe in these squads. That was called the Scorpion Squad or whatever. Here they call them the jump out squad, who jump out on people, unprovoked, pretextual stops. As long as they exist, there will be no trust between the community and the police. As long as those squads exist.
I think another layer of that is when officers see their partners engaging in this, there should be an effort, and I'm sure I'm not sure, but I don't know if there is some training around how to help your partner de-escalate the situation.
Well, one of the things that a lot of cities and systems are trying to change is to make it mandatory.
Yeah.
That you need to see to stop abuse. That you can't just stand back and watch it and not be held accountable also.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're a police officer, you're supposed to be protecting people. And if you're just sitting back watching abuse being done by anyone, then you're not doing your job.
Yeah. And to reward the ones who de-escalate and not penalize them and ostracize them and retaliate against them, and especially if they report it. That's part of the culture, and maybe it's training and development and helping them to really shift their perspective on the way that they carry out their duties. But I
saw police officers got someone by the throat and choking them, female officer comes up and grabs his arm, he turns and grabs her by the throat.
Yeah, I've heard of that. Yeah.
And he should not be a police officer.
He shouldn't be doing almost anything at this point. So, I mean, that kind of temper and violent reaction to any human being is just absolutely, it's not normal. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And until we start enforcing that, until we start saying there's a penalty
yeah.
for retaliation against another officer or failing to protect when you are a police officer, it won't happen.
Mm-hmm. So the police, law enforcement, the criminal justice system has an opportunity to really to make a difference and lead, right? And not just toe the line, but to say, we don't want you to be a representative. We don't want you to represent us anymore. And I'm speaking of the bad actors within these systems. But also taking the lead around cultural change. And maybe it's also partnership in terms of what you're doing as a chair of this panel, but also commissioner of OPAT, ensuring that citizens and residents of these communities are also part of the conversation and keeping police officers and the system accountable. There has to be levels of transparency. There has to be accountability. There has to be training. There has to be reform. There's no way around it. So what do we do? What do individuals do? How do we help in addressing and correcting and reforming these systems?
By being politically active.
Mm-hmm.
By expressing our outrage when something happens. See, I don't want to wait for the next person to be killed before I raise my voice.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I think we should have community meetings. I think that people have to say, we won't tolerate this.
Yeah.
That we will get rid of the police chief if he can't control it. And the police officers, if they can't control, we'll start over. Mm-hmm. We'll hire new people. Mm-hmm. If you won't do what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. But the unions have to be part of that.
Yes.
You know, as long as you have the unions protecting bad cops, they're going to have a bad name. Mm-hmm. And that's part of the problem.
And everybody's a taxpayer, right? If you work here, you're paying some taxes, and it's your taxpayers that are paying for the police department that you have, better or worse, or for worse.
And paying the lawsuits.
Yeah.
You know, I think when someone does something wrong, they should pay for it, not the city.
Yeah.
So you should be able to sue individual police officers, not for trivial things.
Yeah.
But there's a standard. When there's been physical abuse, you should be able to sue your abuser and not have to sue the city. You know, sue the city because you really want to get some money out of it. You know, but it shouldn't be just the city. It should be them individually. And if they have to pay individually, then a lot of that abuse would disappear. Because they don't want to have to pay out of their pocket.
So we talked about what individuals can do. What can the community at large do?
The same thing.
Same thing.
We need to stand up to people like, what's his name, Santos, who don't want history to be taught. We need to teach the true history, not be ashamed of it. It's what happened. You know, when I was in law school, we got to in constitutional law, we got to the internment of the Japanese, and the professor was going to skip it. I said, whoa, wait a moment. Aren't we going to cover this part? He said, well, I didn't want to upset people. I said, look, if we can't cover the truth, then we shouldn't be lawyers.
Yeah.
You know, and we went through it, you know, and that's what we have to do. We have to say we will face our ugly truths,
Mhm.
and it will help all of us be better
Yeah.
because of.
There's a scripture that says, you shall know the truth and the truth will set you free. And honestly, I think the more we hide the truth of our past, the more it comes back. I can't remember who said that when we ignore our past, we repeat it. And I'm loosely paraphrasing the quote, but I'm sorry.
I know the quote, yes.
Yes, but we're repeating the past in the present over and over and over again. And we
Okay, I was going to say we're continuing the past.
yeah,
We're not repeating it, we're continuing it.
we're
We're
continuing.
continuing to do the same things we've always done, and we expect a different outcome. That's what it is. You know,
Yeah.
it's that quote about doing something stupid and thinking something.
Insanity. Mhm.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
very much part of the problem. We
Yeah.
are letting the same things happen over and over. And if it's happening to us, you are at risk also,
Yes. Yeah.
you know?
Yeah.
So,
And police brutality doesn't necessarily have a color, although communities of color, specifically Black communities, are over policed. But a police brutality,
doesn't stop with us.
it doesn't stop with us. It's everywhere. And so while it's not the a majority of police officers, the reality is it's something that affects everybody. What affects your neighbor does affect me. So I'll close in saying that we have a lot of work to do.
Yes.
One of the things that I did after the brutal death of Tyre Nichols, I put out a newsletter through St. Cyr Consulting, and it talked about what organizations could do to continue to address systemic racism. It exists. I shared with someone some of the experiences that I had in the highest levels in my organizations. It happens. I don't know any person of color, any Black person specifically, woman or man, who hasn't experienced some level of bias, prejudice, or racism in their roles. So the article, the newsletter will be in the description for the viewers so they can read through all of that. There's a lot of resources, free resources, some services that they can take advantage of as well. But Judge Harris, are there any resources or websites or information that you would recommend viewers review?
Not offhand. I didn't think about it.
Yeah, I'm asking this literally just in the moment.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I refer people to the NAACP all the time,
Yeah.
you know, to let them help you take the lead
Mhm.
for all types of situations.
The trauma of racism, it just, yeah, I don't even know sometimes how we get up every day and decide to engage.
Got to go out. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, as a judge, the racism that I faced, you know, look, court officers don't want to let me into court. You know, I mean, those things stay with you, you know, and it's real. It's still real out there, and we have to keep fighting.
Yeah.
It's not like it was when I was a kid, and I'm thankful for that. But it's still real, and it's still killing too many of us.
Yeah.
But it's also the trauma
Yeah.
that we live with,
Mm-hmm.
that our children live with. It's difficult.
Yeah. And it's not enough. Oh goodness. I said I'm ending, but the one thing that comes to mind is the politicization. Hopefully I'm saying that word correctly, but it's just making the issues of race and racism political.
Yes.
And we have to stop doing that. We're talking about human rights. We're talking about humanity.
And catering catering to the basic, the worst parts of us for political advantage.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We have to do better. We all have an opportunity to be the change we want to see. We have to educate ourselves. We have to see ourselves, and we have to effectuate change in our hearts, in our minds, in our homes, in our roles, in our communities, in our organizations. We all have a responsibility to do that. So I always say, whoever is willing, all the willing hearts and minds, we can get together and continue to make progress around these areas. Judge Harris, thank you so much for this important conversation. We love police officers. We pray for police officers. We are all well acquainted with police officers, and Judge Harris shared a lot about his brother, and I have countless friends and family members as well. And so we want to see change because we know it's possible. And so, but we have a lot of work to do, and we have to know the truth. We have to seek the truth, and we have to change so that it can set us free and we can have a better experience with our police departments and every city and town across the United States. So thank you again, Judge Harris. Any final words?
Don't give up the fight.
Yeah.
Don't give it up. We got to keep it going.
Yeah.
Not just for ourselves, but for our children and our grandchildren.
Yeah.
And I have great grandchildren. So, you know, I want them to live in a better world than I did.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.